You are listening to the SDSU Football Podcast, presented by the East Village Times, with your hosts Andre Hagverdian and Paul Garrison. Welcome back to the SDSU Football Podcast. I am your host Andre Hagverdian, and we'll be joined shortly by my co-host Paul Garrison. This is episode 65, and in this episode, we interviewed the newest defensive line coach at San Diego State, Bojay Filimoeatu, who was hired in January of this year after the departure of Justin Enna, who was a defensive line coach at San Diego State in 2022 and who moved on to take a linebackers coach position at BYU, his alma mater, in his hometown. Bojay Filimoeatu coached the defensive line at UNLV last year and also has extensive experience in the Mountain West, coaching at his alma mater, Utah State, and also San Jose State. He's a new coach to the Aztec Nation, so I think you guys will enjoy the discussion about where he's from, his background, coaching and philosophy defensively, and how his Polynesian culture kind of fits what the Aztecs program is all about. Paul did this interview solo as I was in Las Vegas covering the Mountain West Conference basketball tournament. Paul was able to do this one with Coach Bojay about a week or so ago. Great information, and I think you guys will enjoy it, so let's get right to it.
Aztec Nation, we are excited to have the defensive line coach for the SDSU Aztecs joining us today, Coach Bojay Filimoeatu. Coach, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's been a great day so far, so I can't complain.
Right on, man. So let me just jumping in. You were hired in January to be the defensive line coach, a position that you also coached recently at UCLA, beg your pardon, UNLV. Can you tell us just how that process went and how excited you are to be an Aztec?
Yeah, so obviously I joined the staff of UNLV last year during this time. Kind of aware of the situation I was in taking that job, but knowing that I was fortunate enough that Marcus Arroyo looked out for me and gave me a 2-year. So, obviously I wanted to take it because of that. Plus, I wanted to see if I can be part of a program to flip. So I started there. Eventually, the season started off well, then a lot of injuries and things that were kind of out of our control kind of happened, and we kind of started spiraling down and went on a losing streak, leading to UNLV AD and to let go of Marcus and us and the staff. So it was very unfortunate, but, things happen for a reason. And I was very fortunate enough to get this opportunity here at San Diego State. Justin Enna, who's a brother to me, an older brother to me, was here recently last year. So when he had the opportunity to go home to BYU, which is a tremendous opportunity for him, I know that it hurt leaving here, but for one thing, his family was in the whole transition of going back home. So great deal for him. So once he got that job at BYU, he put my name in for San Diego State with Coach Hulk and Coach Maddox, and it kind of went from there. We met at the convention for the first time, and then a week later they bring me in for an interview and so on and so forth, and I end up here. I'm very, very fortunate. This has always been probably one of my dream jobs from the get-go because of where my wife was raised. She was raised in Temecula. Okay. All her siblings went to San Diego State, and it's worked out so great, and I couldn't be more happier to be here.
Terrific, man. Before turning the page to what's been happening so far up on the Mesa, I mean, you mentioned that, Coach Arroyo wasn't brought back, things of that nature, but you had some studs playing for you last year. Most notably, Aztec fans will remember because they had a hard time blocking him. Adam Platt Jr., and he was an all-conference performer. You had another honorable mention. I mean, from a coaching perspective, when you see your guys able to make leaps like that, man, what is that like for you?
Man, it's probably the best feeling you get as a coach. to see one of your dudes that's hardworking and does everything right to pay off, towards the end of the season. But seeing them blossom, not just those guys, but a lot of those depth guys, they turned into some great technicians, and they continue to progress in that right direction all year. When things got bad for the room, I think we lost about 4 guys to injuries, which took them out about 3 games. So a lot of those guys stepped up, and they had to play some, crucial reps in those games, especially towards San Diego State. I think we only had Plant out there with 3 other alternates. And the other kid that played really well versus San Diego State last year was Jalen Dixon. And seeing those guys develop during the year at a really rapid pace it really made me proud. I'll say that. But it all starts with them. I can only lead them so far. They're going to have to go the rest, and those guys put in the work and believed in themselves and got it done.
Well, you also, in addition to UNLV, you've had stops with Utah State, San Jose State in the conference. Did you feel that being able to, I guess, have that familiarity with the Mountain West and the kind of players who have succeeded here gives you an edge in your current role?
Yeah, of course. I think just having the history that I have in this conference is such a great thing to have on my side, because I know the majority of the teams that are playing, that the staffs are still on board, so they're running the same schemes, and I can help in that extent. But most important thing is that I want to make sure that we're creating and developing the guys to compete with those guys, because I know what they have on the other side. Obviously, I was at Utah State and San Jose State, so seeing what they have compared to ours, you want to continue to progress and be better than them. And having that knowledge, it does help. But it all just comes down to who's going to be the better guy on Saturdays or Fridays or Thursdays. So I just want to make sure that our guys understand that, and we go from there.
You also played at Utah State.
Yes.
You JUCO All-American, and then 2 years at Utah State. For maybe some of the younger Aztec fans who may not know, man, what kind of player were you?
Yeah, I was okay. I was
onto the Raiders, into the NFL. Yeah, I'm gonna say a little more than okay.
Yeah, I was okay. I mean, I was very fortunate to get into some really good schemes and play under some really good coaches and surround myself with really good players. So, that will allow you to play fast and make plays. And, I'm not going to give me the credit. I'll give it to everybody else to make sure that it's known that your surroundings can help you as well.
So then moving on to your new role, you jump in and there's a lot of turnover inside of the room, especially at the top of the depth chart. What is just your initial impression and how camp is going for the defensive line?
I would say the most shocking thing to me was obviously not just the loss of production and depth that these guys had last year to now, but the culture that these guys have, not just for the D-line, but the whole entire team. It's very, very strong culture, and it's built from the ground up. They're very tough. And every year I have played San Diego State, we knew it was going to be a battle. These guys are probably one of the reasons why I got fired at UNLV and Utah State. So to see why they're so tough and why the culture is so strong here, because of what these guys do day in and day out. It's no excuses. It's get the job done and just be relentless. And then to see that so far since I've been here has been the biggest surprise for me, because you don't see it as an opponent. But when you get here, you understand why San Diego State is known to be tough, relentless, and always really, really good on defense, because of the structure has been set since 2009, I believe.
Coming into the spring, I mean, what was kind of like your, biggest goal or couple 3 goals about what you were hoping to accomplish this spring? I think you're 60% through.
Yeah. My biggest thing was to make sure that we continue to grow the depth at the D-line. Like you said earlier, with the loss of production and depth and seniors and all that stuff, it kind of gone last year. So trying to build that depth from the young guys for the new guys, and making sure that we can build some technicians. And it all starts with fundamentals and technique. And if we can harp on that every single day, like Coach Hoke says, you can see a little, you'll see a lot. And that's where I'm trying to focus on with this young group. And it's a challenge, I can say the same thing was said to me at UNLV. And, those guys bought in. And if I can probably do the same thing here, where we can get some guys to buy into the system and the culture with the new guys, then we'll get this thing rolling. But, we're going to have to take it day by day.
Now, one guy who is coming back, who was a linebacker, went to D line, and in many ways was the fourth starting lineman last year, Garrett Fountain. Is he primed for a breakout in 2023?
Yeah, man. So far since I've been here, he has been one of the hardest working, humblest leaders on this group. And me being a new coach, he's stepping into that role of being that leader, and showing the new guys how to do this, how to do that. Spending time with them. After practice, you always see Garrett in the film room, grabbing his food, going there, watching the film with the guys to get ahead of it before we even grade it. So that right there, that attribute shows you how much he's ready to break out this year. And then it all really comes down to your preparation so you can play fast on Saturdays. And he's taking the right strides. I'm excited to see what he does next fall.
And then a couple of young guys who Coach Hoke mentioned to us when we were out at practice, Darian Dalton, Dominic Oliver. What have you seen from those two and their progression as such young guys?
I think those guys are very talented. They're very sudden off the ball. They have the twitch. I think that's going to have to now make sure that they understand is continue to stack consistent days with progressing in the right direction. Coach Hoke always says you're either getting better or you're getting worse. And so we're always trying to get that 1% better every day. With them, they're just going to have to focus on the little details. And if they can focus on those things, it'll make the bigger picture beautiful. So if I can get them to hone in on that, then we'll go in the right direction.
You coming from a JC, I mean, I think some of the hard parts is, when somebody who goes to the NFL becomes a coach, right? It's not always easy to put, your heart into your players' chests or your way of approaching it, things of that nature. At the same time, JC players, especially let's say even a guy like, Jonah Tavai, it took him a year before he really got going after the transfer, and then he becomes an All-American. I mean, do you feel like your experience playing and making that transition allows you to be a better coach for these guys because you have quite a few who are making that transition on the D-line this year?
Yeah, I think, knowledge is power in life. And I'm coming from experience, and I was in their shoes. Now, I was very fortunate that my JUCO was really, really balanced with school, weight room, and practice. So, making the jump to the next level wasn't a dramatic jump. Obviously, the scheme was. So picking up on that was the hardest. Seeing nowadays, when you do take a JUCO transfer guy, they have to get used to the time frame because, when you come to a D1 program or any college atmosphere where you're structured from basically when you wake up all the way down to at night where you have study hall ending it, now you have to adjust your time frame. Instead of having 8 hours of free time after practice, you have really 2 to unwind and go to sleep. So, and I love that part because it's making men, right? You're taking really young teenage kids and understanding that the time frame and time use is the most important. And so that's what I learned when I made the transition, and it's helped me in life in general to set up time and to make sure I'm structured from the night before, setting up for the next morning so I can start it fast. And if I can help those guys understand that, then we'll make the right strides. But again, it just comes to taking it day by day with them.
And so with those three guys, Hall, Saladin, you have to give me his name better.
Tupu. Tupu.
Tubu, yeah.
Yeah, Tupu. Alualu.
Yeah, Alualu. Yeah, thank you. I mean, they look, just from the look of it out of practice, they look physically where they need to be. But what is that next thing for them to be able to really make that transition, I guess, on the field, in addition to what you just described off of it?
It's basically just mastering the playbook and the technique within the playbook and fundamentals. Obviously, you're taking a guy that has built habits over this time frame at JUCO, and then you put him in a system where now he has to learn new habits. And so you're trying to break those old habits so they create new ones that you want them to see. And so, you're going to have to harp on it every single day. It's not going to be right. It's not going to be perfect every single time, but if you can practice with them and show the patience so they can actually develop, then you'll head in the right direction. But those guys are going to have to continue just to create those good habits because you are what you repeatedly do. And if you continue to improve in that aspect of creating good habits, then we'll be all right. But that's the biggest thing I have to do with them.
We've had the opportunity to have a few of them on the podcast, a few of the incoming freshmen on the defensive line on the podcast. They've all spoken how excited they are to work with a head coach who also focuses in on the D line. From your perspective, because it's pretty unique for a head coach to be like that and that involved. What do you appreciate from that? What is that dynamic like for you and just Coach Hoke in general with that defensive line?
Oh, it's great. I'm like a sponge right now. I'm just taking in all the wisdom, all the coaching and every detail of tips of being a man basically in life. I'm taking it from Coach, and he's done awesome for this room. And I just want to make sure that I do justice for him. Obviously, I'm coming into a situation where I'm in a new scheme, new style of defense. And, him and Coach Maddox are, have the patience with me so I can learn it and be caught up. And I'm getting there. The one thing I would say is those guys are awesome. It's been probably one of the best staffs I have probably worked for, and I'm saying that in a short amount of time. So It feels home here. It feels like a family. And we all want the same goal. We all want to make sure we can press and push for that championship. And those guys are showing me the way, and I just got to take it and go. And it's been a blessing, I'll tell you that.
We also had Savai Esalu, tight end coach, on the podcast before last season. Andrew Amavai, who is the dad of Liu Amavai, quarterback,
Mm-hmm.
and they both, on separate conversations, they described Hoke as being an honorary Paulie. And so I mean, tell us about what is it about Coach Hoke, from your perspective, that resonates so well with Polynesian culture?
So with all our cultures, I think we all wear our our heart on our sleeves. Our feelings is always in front of us, and we can tell right away if you're a genuine good person or you're not. And I think that's just how we were raised, how our culture is. We always go off that first impression. And with Coach, he doesn't put up a wall. You can feel how genuine he is. He's not going to be the fake tough guy. He's going to tell you straight, but he shows that he actually loves you through that. And I think we can all relate to somebody like that in our life, whoever it may be, that significant person that, is that person. And he does such a great job with our team and with us coaches that we actually feel that presence from him, so we look up to him and we want to work hard for him. I can say, out of my whole career, one of the dudes that I have seen do that, where their coaching staff and their players want to play for him hard and coach for him hard. And he's just that type of guy.
Very similar thing, man. You were talking earlier about the culture of San Diego State, and that was the thing that really jumped out to you. In studying that same idea about the different cultures, different Polynesian cultures, and kind of then also the blending that took place because of the states and all that stuff that worked out with it, just came away really impressed by how similar the culture of San Diego State is to the values of all of those different cultures, not just about Coach Hoke, but the program in general. Why is it, do you feel like there is so much resonance between all these Polynesian cultures and also what's happening at San Diego State?
What I can say is, from a young age, I was taught tough. My dad disciplined me, but the thing that we understood as kids is if you did wrong, you're going to get disciplined. And we were taught at a very young age to respect our elders, and to respect women and treat women with respect. And we have to make sure daily life, and it's been instilled in us since the beginning. And so when you get to this place and you see why the culture is so strong, because it's so similar to ours. Like, we want to be humble, hardworking, and hungry, and make sure that we respect everyone. And then when we step on the field, just like in our life, anything that we were brought up in any sports, that warrior mentality comes out. And back in my culture, my ancestors, like, they were warriors out on the sea. And so I think that comes out with sports. And so we can all resonate with that, especially when you come here. Everybody wants to battle, and it's a brotherhood. It really is. And that's what has been the biggest thing I have seen so far, is these guys are tight like glue, and they all want to work hard, not just for themselves, but the brother next to them. And that's what's really cool.
So I mean, if you mind, would you tell us a little bit more about that heritage? Where you come from, or and how that bears on your work.
Of course. So I'm Tongan. Like, my mom and dad actually come from the beautiful island of Tonga, and it's very special place in my heart, just because of how my dad was raised, my mom was raised. My dad was brought up with 6 sisters and 4 brothers, so he has a big family.
Yeah.
And they adopted, so they took in a lot of their cousins that became their siblings. So we have a big family, and family to us is everything. In our culture, we believe, our first cousins is still our brother and sisters, So that's why you always hear us say, "That's my cousin," "That's my cousin." But really, we're really saying that's my brother and sister. And the respect out of that is showing that women in our culture are treated at the highest level. And it starts with that. All our sisters, our mothers, our wives, they get the most respect out of everyone. And it starts with that. I think if you show that type of respect towards any female, then of course you're going to respect your elders. And if you don't, then there's stuff that you have to pay for, right? And that's with your father, that's with your grandpa, your uncle. I mean, it can be anybody. Not just my father disciplined me. It was a tribe that disciplined me. And that's what raised me to be the man who I am today. Obviously, my dad was very tough on me with sports. I grew up with 5 sisters, and I was the youngest, so I was the only boy. And my dad was very tough on me. But he showed me the way. He started me at a young age working construction when I was 8, all the way till I was 18. And It showed me that either I can be successful in life and take this football thing and make something out of it, or I can go back and work like he did, laying brick, pouring cement, building houses. But I loved it because it did show me some traits where I can develop if it went the other way. And it did show me what I really wanted to do. I want to not work a 9 to 5. I want to make sure that I can start my career and actually play football. So I had that hunger from the start because of my dad and the culture I was raised in. But it's just the beauty of our Tongan, Samoan, Fijian, New Zealand, Hawaiian culture that it ties us back to our roots. And it's very special to us because you see any Poly on the street and you're Polynesian, right away you say hi. And in my language, we call it Feraki. So we're hugging and kissing each other, introducing ourselves in the right way. So we show our respect to that fellow person. And it starts with that. And then I think it's one of the most unique things about our culture is that we can go anywhere. But once you see another fellow Polynesian, you're always going to say hi.
I love it, man. 2 last questions for me. One of them, just asking about, what is it that you're needing to accomplish? A little bit out of order, but what is it that you're needing to accomplish these last couple of weeks leading up into the spring game?
Yeah, I still want to create technicians in the room. Obviously, the playmaking ability, but that will come with you doing your job. You're 111. And if we continue stride in that direction, just doing your job first, and then you'll make plays. The one thing I don't want to do is not do your job and you trying to do someone else's job because, selfishly you want to make the tackle. And I want to make sure that they understand that it's all just one-on-one battles across the board. And if you can do your job and beat that one man in front of you, that you'll make plays and you'll be defensively sound. And I want to see that improvement coming into next week in the spring game. I want to let these guys loose. I want them to understand that the only way you can play fast if you know what you're doing out there. And we're taking those strides every practice. But I wanted to go faster, but I know down that it has to slow down for them first in order to get faster. So that's what I want to see these next couple of weeks.
Terrific, man. You mentioned, I think Aztec Nation really liked this, man, because you mentioned Coach Anna. Aztec fans don't like to lose to BYU for anything,
No doubt.
even for a coach. Is it true that you hated BYU growing up? And did any of that kind of still with you a little bit today?
Yes.
All right, there it is.
Yes. I've never been a fan. I never will be a fan. Just the way I was raised. I was neither a Utah fan either.
Well, there you go.
I didn't like both schools. I mean, I went to Utah State, so that should tell you enough. But going to Utah State, made me hate BYU even more. Now, do I respect them? Of course I do. I respect every coach there, Kalani all the way down. I have the most respect for those guys. But if we go at it, then of course I'm going to take everything to them because my rivalry at heart is still there.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I did a little homework and I saw that and I go, oh man, Aztec fans, they're gonna love their new coach, man. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. And it was great getting to know you. And blessed of luck as the spring goes forward.
Appreciate it, Paul, man. Thank you so much.
Paul, that was your interview with Bojay Filimoeatu. Thank you for taking that one. As I was in Las Vegas covering the basketball tournament. Obviously, I really enjoyed the interview and getting to know Bojay because he's a new coach. He's new to Aztec Nation. He's new to all of us. The Polynesian culture and his background and the fit, obviously, is a important part of his story. My article that came out on Monday morning kind of chronicles that. Before we get into kind of the football aspect of the defensive line and San Diego State, what are your main takeaways in terms of that?
I think my main takeaway is in that aspect of it is that they were really wanting to, I think, continue to make inroads as a program into just kind of, I guess, emphasizing and doubling down on that aspect of the Polynesian culture and how that meshes with what they're trying to do at San Diego State. So I think it made sense that they would reach out to him. I always think it's interesting when anybody leaves, and we obviously never had the opportunity to sit down with Coach Enna in the exact same way. I think it's a real classy way that he would go out and he would leave and he would be able to fill a replacement. And obviously, if you've been on social media and things like that, you've been seeing him recruiting Utah and doing some of the same things. And obviously, he has the connections in those ways. And so I think just from the very beginning, that fit with the culture, I think is really, really good. And, obviously, time will tell, how good of a coach he is.
He has extensive experience in the Mountain West, which I think gives him a leg up. One thing he said that I don't think he gave himself enough credit for, he was kind of downplaying it, was when he was talking about San Diego State's toughness and their culture. He said, these guys are probably one of the reasons why I got fired at UNLV and Utah State, right?
Good line.
That definitely doesn't apply to UNLV because his 1 year at UNLV last year, their defensive line played lights out, and they wrecked San Diego State's offensive line for most of that game until the last drive.
Right.
And I think the last drive was more because they got worn down. Bojay mentioned that they had some injuries. They were playing the second string guys. Adam Plant was obviously playing, and he had a good game. So it wasn't the UNLV. It wasn't the San Diego State game that got the coaching staff at UNLV fired, or at least Bojay. So I wanted to clear that up, that I think Utah State was a little few years before. I don't necessarily know if that applies or not, but just wanted to kind of clear that sentence up, because I think what UNLV's defensive line did in last year's game might have been a big reason why Bojay got hired to San Diego State, as Coach Hope talked about in the statement they released when they hired Bojay. Listening to Bojay talk about what he's trying to get out of the defensive line is building. He uses the word creating technicians, right? Fundamentals and technique. And when you have such a young group, I think getting back to the fundamentals is critical, right? And I think I like the way he talks about do your job. You're a defensive lineman, you're going up against the left tackle, or you're going up against the center or the guard. Do your job, beat your guy, do what you're supposed to do on your play, and rely and trust on the other guys on the defensive line and the other guys on your defense to do their job. And if you do that, you're going to be sound and you're going to be successful. And I like that approach. I mean, it kind of applies to any position, but I think defensive linemen are the ones that want to get sacks, so they want to get the tackles for losses. And sometimes they may play out of their roles or their assignments to do that, which could throw the entire defense off. So I think it was important to have that base, especially when you're dealing with a young group who may not have that experience of playing that way. So I think that's a critical philosophy that I think is going to help San Diego State a lot this year.
And I think echoing that, I think his football story, I think, is very compelling. San Diego State has had some great defensive linemen, especially the last few years, but none of them came in as like highly thought of recruits, right? And they worked themselves to that level the exact same way that coach did. And so I think that being able to, go to the junior college guys that they have and be able to say, this is the difference. I saw it, I lived it, this is what it is. Be able to say, like, this is what can make you successful, even if you're not necessarily like the biggest, strongest, fastest guy. Here's what you can do. Here's how you can be better. And so I think from that perspective, it also fits. And of course, he was humble about his playing days, even though he was, an MVP of a league and made it to the NFL, saw snaps in the NFL. I think that holds a lot of weight. And then I think the other part that's really interesting, we've asked Coach Hoke what it's like for him to be what does he think that's like for the defensive line coach, that he's so involved and all of that. And we've never got the opportunity to ask it the other way. And for him just to say that he's like a sponge and he's learning and he's growing, it's an interesting perspective, because that's right. Like this is a world-class defensive line coach that he gets to work with every single day, who was, 3 years, 4 years removed from doing it in the NFL. And that opportunity, is just really unique. And that he's embracing that and running with that, I think is just really positive. And it says a lot of things about him, because, football's competitive. These guys are competitors, and some people wouldn't necessarily be able to allow somebody else to shine or to get credit or to, be the decider or whatever, even if they are the head coach, and the fact that he can do all of those things, I think just helps, because San Diego State, again, as I said at the very beginning of this little part, is just like they still have not figured out how to get the highest of the highest defensive line guys yet, or even to have the defensive line be at the same level that they're getting at the linebacker, same level that they're getting in the secondary. And so they have to develop everywhere. That's never going to change, but it's especially true with that defensive line, and having somebody who, has that mentality of development, has that mentality, I think is going to do well for them.
Well, the JUCO aspect of his career I think is really important, because of the amount of JUCO guys they have on the team now. They brought in 3 for spring. They've got a 4th coming in the fall. And, he kind of talked about 2 main transitions. One is the time management aspect of it. Being in a Division I college, university, you're basically eating, breathing, football, but with school, add school on top of that, your free time I think he said, instead of having 8 hours in JUCO, you have 2 hours, and next thing you know, it's 11 p.m.
Right.
And you need to go to sleep because you may need to get up at 5 to go to work out or whatever. So I think getting, young men to bet on track for that is critical. And then I think it was interesting how he was talking about, people have built habits in the JUCO, and here you want to break those old habits and create new habits. And that's difficult, and that's a challenge for people as
Yeah.
you'll see at practice. You're just not learning a new scheme, a 3-3-5, but you're learning to do it at a D1 level and practice at the D1 level. And it's interesting because some JUCO guys might think that their habits are good and they've been successful at the JUCO level because they have good habits. And then they come here and they realize, oh, those habits are maybe not so good, and or they need to be tweaked, or they need to be revamped. So it's a challenge. We've talked a lot about Jonah Tavai, who it took him a year coming from the JUCO level to become a starter and to become impactful. And then it was, the year after that where he actually became, an all-conference player. So it takes time for those guys.
It does, and I think that as we're constantly just paying attention to how recruiting goes at San Diego State, that there's one thought that potentially with the one-time transfer rule and how that trickles down to recruiting is that there might be higher level junior college guys who used to be going elsewhere, and there's just less space because these guys are finding these transfers that are moving and things like that. And so potentially this won't be the last time that they're going to be bringing in people. I mean, obviously they did it because there was a big hole, not only in needing players to jump in, but just in that junior year, there just weren't a lot of players. It was a low class, and they brought some in for numbers wise, but I definitely think that has the potential, right? And that's always potential to be something that's really good. But I think his track record speaks for itself. I think that San Diego State fans, we're used to the Aztecs being able to run and beat up on the Rebels for a long time. And when you look at the idea that they brought in 2 coaches from that staff, primarily because they saw it happen. I mean, Coach Lindley told us the exact same thing about Jonathan Krause, was just like receivers weren't a big problem for UNLV. And then suddenly they were. The D-line was not something that you were talking about when you thought about UNLV. And then suddenly there were. And so, they want that. They want to have development. They want to be able to help guys come in and be better. And they saw it in those 2 in a school up close. And they're hoping, to work their magic with the Aztecs.
The last thing I wanted to talk about or mention from the interview was you asked Coach about Garrett Fountain.
Mm-hmm.
And, if there's one guy on the defensive line where you can say has experience and has quality snaps and quality production, even in, somewhat limited role, it's Garrett Fountain. And, we've talked on this podcast before about him taking that next step to becoming, not just a starter, but the main guy on the defensive line, the playmaker. And everything we've heard and seen so far has pointed to that. But it was nice to hear Coach say not just that he's the hardest working and he's humble, but he's taken on the leadership role of working with the younger guys, watching film with them after practice, showing them the ropes, working with them on the field. That's what you need, because as we talked about, all those other guys who did that are gone. And somebody needs to take that role. And Garrett has stepped up. And so I'm excited because I think we could see a huge jump from him from, playing every down, making plays off the edge, stopping the run, rushing the quarterback. I think he's primed for a huge year.
I agree, and I think it's interesting too. When we've been to practice, the way they handle different guys, right? Dan Opoco, they've been limiting his snaps, but they're expecting him to be a big contributor this year, potentially as starter. But with Garrett Fountain, he's been in everything, and I think it's just a reminder how new he is still to the position.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's another aspect of that leadership role is he is always out there. He is always competing. He is doing all of that. I think that, it's great to hear because, they need somebody. They need that front six to be better. But why don't we keep talking about the practice, man? We were out there practice today. What were some of your general observations from the last Monday practice of spring?
Yeah, I was going to say today.
On the first day of spring.
Today is Monday. So yeah, it was the last practice before the spring game. So it's technically practice 14 out of 15 because the spring game is considered, number 15. It was a lot more team drill oriented than I think it was from the earlier practice we went to, which I think gives you a better sense of how the players are working together. I think the first overall impression, and I think as we were talking to each other during practice, was a lot improved play by the quarterbacks and across the board. And that's decision making, the throws. We saw a lot of nice throws, a lot of nice spirals, a lot of out passes, out and ups, things like that, slants that overall from quarterback 1 through quarterback 5 was much more improved than we had seen a couple weeks ago at some of the practices we went to. And I think that jumped out to both of us that there's improvement there. Now it's one practice. A lot can be gleaned from one practice, and then the spring game could be different. But I think it shows an improvement that with Ryan Lindley and the rest of the offense, they're making strides, at least from what we can see.
I would agree, and how we're basing that off of. I mean, that's always one of the fun parts of this, right? Is you make these evaluations, and and since we've been able to do this for a few years, you really, these are conversations that you and I have had. Like, what are we looking at? How can we tell if they're better? What are some of those ways that the evidence of that? And so you mentioned just the tightness of the spirals, the locations of where the passes were thrown. But one giant thing for me that I always like to pay attention to is if there's no rush. If there's no rush, a D1 quarterback has got to be able to pick apart a defense. Like, okay, there might be a drop, okay, there might be a missed pass, but if you're not completing 75% of your passes in 7-on-7 at the D1 level, that would be a sign of trouble. And so today, it didn't matter the quarterback that was going up there. They were just picking apart the defense. And it wasn't necessarily that they were going over the top every time, but they were making completions like every time. And there were times where they fitted in windows, and there was times when they went over the top. There were times where they just dunked it down and went short. They hit those out routes like you're talking about. They did all of the things, but like there's no rush. So a quarterback should be able to do that, and a receiver should be able to get open because, of course, the rush means so much. And we saw that when they went into the 11-on-11, and there were some times where the receiver had broken open because they just broke in coverage or whatever, and the QB wasn't able to get the ball there because they got sacked before it happened, or they couldn't throw, they couldn't step into the ball. And so I just think those are the things that I paid attention to as saying, like, okay, did they do what they needed to do? Did they look like they were a D1 quarterback who could complete 75% with no rush? And they did. And like I said, like you said, it was through multiple QBs. And I think as you were talking about with Garrett Fountain, one thing that stood out to me as I went to the different position groups is how common it was for the older players to be giving little tips to like younger players. Like for instance, I saw Christian Jones and Cade Bennett were practicing a double team drill. And in the double team drill, the other offensive linemen are simulating the defensive line and the linebacker. Coach Crum is behind them, and he's telling the defenders where they're supposed to be, and the two linemen are supposed to double team, and then one, depending on how the defensive lineman goes, is supposed to break off and go and get to the next level. They do the drill, the coaches say nothing, and they move on down the line to the next group. And Joey Wright, who is, presumably competing with Christian Jones, is telling him about hand placement and is telling him, put your hands here and you're going to be able to, things of that. And you're just like, that's a cool thing for a veteran to do, to be team oriented like that. And that was just one of a number of times that I noticed the older players just giving little pointers here or there on how to do, on just those small particulars, right? The technician stuff that Coach Bojay was talking about. And so, do we call him Coach Bojay or Coach Filimoeatu? How do we do
I've
that?
heard a lot of people call him Coach Bojay, so
That's what I've heard too. That's what I've heard. Okay. Filimoeatu, sorry. So anyway, that really jumped out to me. That stood out to me, that as much as these kids are competing against each other, there is a lot of that team oriented stuff. And so that really stood out as a positive.
Yeah, we should also mention North Turner was at practice today.
Hey, yeah.
Former Chargers head coach, former offensive coordinator at multiple spots, including the Cowboys when they were winning Super Bowls in the 90s. We asked Ryan, we had a chance to talk to Ryan Lindley after practice, and we asked him about that. And he talked about how having being able to pick his brain from an outsider's perspective, who's just watching and seeing what they're doing, I think is something that he's looking forward to after spring is over. There could be one or two little things that come out of that conversation that could end up being major, advantages or benefits to the offense, And I think having that expertise, at least watching as an observer and then providing input, I think is really helpful for, especially in a first-time offensive coordinator, with a team that's still building or an offense that's still trying to build their identity. I also liked and this is no shock, but I liked how when we asked Coach Lindley about the offensive line, he basically said, right, they set the tone. We go as they go. As good as, we can say this running back is doing amazing, this wide receiver is doing amazing, the quarterbacks are doing amazing. If they don't have time, they don't have protection, they're not blocked, none of those guys are going to be successful. And, he just joked about how he has some really, really nice kids on the offensive line, and he needs to get them to show their other side, their non-nice side or their non-good side. And that's how you have to be a little bit mean and nasty, right, to be an offensive lineman, and without crossing the line, obviously. And he's trying to get that out of those guys, and I'm sure Coach Goff has been doing that and is doing and will continue to do that. But that's critical. This offense is going to go as the offensive line goes.
Yeah, without question. And I think because the offensive line underperformed last year, it's almost like it's treated like some sort of secret. The coaches know, they know, and that's their focus as well. I think another real interesting part about that we learned today, and I think it was much more explicit. I think we had noticed it and we had noted it, but we didn't bring it up when we talked to him, Coach Lindley. But just his philosophy in how he's going to be the QB coach, and that he's not going to be worried about a lot of those finer points of being a QB. He says, look, these guys have been throwing with their dad their entire lives. This is how they throw. And if they can't be effective throwing the way that they need to be in this offense, he's like, there's a lot of guys in Southern California who aren't going to have these huge flow deliveries and all the things that they're not looking for. And so I thought that was interesting, because we've heard that before, right? Like we've heard that what the coaching staff is able to do is to really kind of put a bow on the production of their players. But the real individual like jumps and leaps in improvement comes when they're away from the coaches. They're going to be reworking their body, paying attention to the techniques, applying, what maybe they saw a little bit in spring over the summer, and then bring that as like a mastered skill into the fall. But the coaches, just by the sheer amount of time that they're away from them, don't have the ability to, take a guy's throwing motion. And, this was the exact example that Lindley gave, and rework that guy's throwing motion. There's just not enough time to do something like that. And so I think that's a real interesting just part to pay attention to and to think about, at least when, making an evaluation, down the road or whatever it is, about like how good of a job is he doing? Like what is he reaching the things that he's supposed to be doing? Because, with Jeff Hecklinski, that was one of the things that he talked about, was taking a very similar approach in his first couple of years, then watching film and saying, it's not that these guys aren't throwing to the correct person. They're just not throwing the ball the way they're supposed to. And that's all about technique. And so then we saw him go and become more of that QB trainer to try to get these guys to be able to do the things that they needed to do. And so it's just, it's different coaches and trying to understand the differences. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And then, changing over maybe to the defense, we also had a great opportunity to talk with Coach Maddox, who clearly missed us. I think I could take that and really look forward to having a more a longer conversation with him, because it just, there's so many things that you ask him a question, and you're expecting coach speak, you're expecting brevity, you're expecting, and then he gives this answer, and there's like 7 things that he says in there that you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that before. And then you want to investigate what he's talking about, and it just leads to such a great conversation. So hopefully with Coach Maddox, we'll be able to, obviously before the season, have him on the podcast again and be able to really pick his brain and just see how he's doing. But it was great to also get an opportunity to talk with him. And I think the high praise that he gave, Des Malone and Patrick McMorris, and he talked about them not just being great players in the Mountain West, but talked about them being some of the best DBs in the nation. If that's true, and he said they're certainly some of the best I've ever been around, right? Coach Maddox said he's ever been around. And if that's true, then I think that the path for the defense to be good becomes clearer. Like if they're really that legit and they're that much, that like high level type guys, that can go a long way for bringing up an inexperienced front six and making them look a whole bunch better than they are.
Yeah, I was mad at you because you beat me to the question that I had for him after practice. Because,
Okay.
2 years ago, they lost 3 starters in the secondary and had to bring in 3 brand new starters with no experience. And we asked him, with such a young and inexperienced secondary, does that put more pressure on the front 6, and especially the front 3, to get more pressure without blitzing?
I want to interrupt. I'm sorry. I want to interrupt. Just so everyone knows that Andre's anger is misplaced. Andre got the first question.
Right.
So he had the opportunity to ask this question. And so my first question was his second question. So just for the record, he could have asked this question, but he went elsewhere. Right, go ahead.
Yeah. But anyway, right. It was to combat an inexperienced and young secondary, you put more pressure on the front 3 that is experienced, that they can get pressure on the quarterback without blitzing. And guess what? You have Cam Thomas, Keyshawn Banks, Jonah Tavai. Those guys did it that year, and they won 12 games. And I was curious to see whether the inverse could also be true, where you have a young and inexperienced front 6, especially front 3, and you have a very experienced secondary. What can they do? And, most coaches will always say it starts up front, right? It starts in the trenches. And so I was curious to see where Coach Maddox would go with that. And he gave a great answer. He said, we know that our DBs are really good at playing man coverage. So if we've got 5 guys in the back that can cover 5 wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends, that lets us do whatever we want with those other front 6 guys. We could bring all 6 and blitz. We could bring 5 and drop the 6th guy back into a zone. We could rush 4. We could disguise and rush maybe 2 or 3 and drop other guys. There's so many different things you can do. But if you have 5 guys in the back that can cover man, that'll give you more of a confidence to do that. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It shows a little bit how the defense may look this year with more blitzing, even blitzing more from the safeties as well. We've seen that.
Right.
And so a lot of versatility there, using those 5 guys in the secondary to either, play man, blitz. He even talked about showing man at the snap and dropping into a zone with the secondary. So, those aren't new things. They've done a lot of that in the past. But given the situation they're going to be in this year with personnel, you might see a lot more of that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the questions that I would like to ask him is that more fun? Is it more fun to be able to, because he talked about being able to be able to get to the quarterback with rushing 4 and how they were really good at it 2 years ago, not so good at the beginning of the season last year. And I just wonder if it's more fun as a defensive coordinator to do that. But I mean, to your point, today we saw multiple times where they were bringing a corner, or multiple times they were bringing a safety. And I think it obviously helps with figuring out how to block that. I think it also helps with, that development on the other side. But that was something from the very beginning that, we talked to Coach Hoke and we said, okay, well, how does it actually look different on the field? And that's what he said. He says, you might do more zone blitzes. You might do, more exotic blitzes because you want to find your playmakers, and your playmakers right now, it looks like clearly are in the secondary. And, I thought it was interesting, just the way they've done the rotations and stuff. It was the most that we've seen Patrick McMorris. He played the entire practice, but they also played Joshua Hunter, and they rotated him with the ones at both Warrior safeties. We're also playing Cedarius Barfield and Devon Celestine as well in those spots. And it's an interesting way that they approach that. I thought defensively, what he talked about, I think, is what you saw, which was, there would be plays where there would be no holes for anybody to go through, and they would look dominant. And, it was just one guy after another coming to the quarterback, or one guy after another coming to the running back. And then, we haven't really seen it very much the last few years, but big holes that the offensive line opened up against that defensive line and against that front 6. And, Cam Davis really flashed with a couple of runs. And so I think that inconsistency, is something that between now and the start of fall camp, I think that there's a real big expectation that they can be better, because so many of the guys that they're depending on are so new, and they won't be new in the fall. And Coach even spoke to that.
He was pretty frank in the beginning when we asked him to kind of assess the defense through spring camp. And, he said the guys are working hard. The guys are very eager to learn, getting used to the culture. But from an overall perspective, they have not met their highest of expectations. And so he understands the situation that they're in, that they're trying to get better. I think the spring game will give them another glimpse of some guys who can splash. I think he did say that they're probably going to play a very base defense in the spring game, because they want guys to not have to overthink, and they want guys to play free and play fast and see where their strengths and weaknesses are in that setting, so that they can work on that as they get into the summer. The linebacker conversation was interesting too, because, he said he's got 5 guys who he thinks are going to get those, either the 3 starting spots and then the 2 primary backups. He didn't want to name names, but then at some point later on, he kind of let the cat out of the bag, and they're kind of the names that most guys would expect. But I think that competition is going to be, obviously the defensive line is going to be important, but I think, as he talked about, they could be playing, if they had a game today, they would probably play 10 guys on the defensive line, rotating guys.
Right.
Linebacker, he was like, okay, we've got 5 guys we can play. And I think whoever gets the 3 starting spots, it's really going to be more like 5 starting spots, because I think you're going to see a lot of rotation between the first string and those main 2 backups, if you want to call them backups, but they're really just secondary starters. So yeah, that's a really strong competition. I'm going to be curious how that depth chart looks after the spring game, and then how it looks when fall camp starts, because a lot, as we saw last year, things will change.
No doubt. All right, man. So I want to ask you a few questions about Pro Day.
Okay.
Because you covered SDSU's Pro Day last Friday.
Yep.
And so here's what was your biggest takeaway from SDSU Pro Day?
My biggest takeaway is how hard those speed drills are. Not the 40-yard dash, because obviously that's hard, but it's just running straight, right? But the short shuttle and the 3-cone drills, seeing guys do that up close, elite athletes who are in phenomenal shape, struggle, running around cones and running back and forth and things like that. I think that was my biggest takeaway, was this is hard, and these elite athletes are struggling at times through them. And I can only imagine, if I tried to get up there and do some of those drills, what a disaster it would be. So that was my takeaway. But if I'm looking at players, I think guys were in phenomenal shape. A lot of times when we're at practice or we're at games, we're seeing football players wear, jerseys, pads. It's really hard to see their bodies, right? And then in this setting, when they're wearing tank tops and they're at some drills, they're shirtless, you're like, okay, these guys are in phenomenal shape. Braxton Burmeister, he is an elite athlete. It's hard. We saw those skills in his running ability in practice and in games, but when you see him up close in that setting and some of the things he's doing, you're like, this guy's an elite athlete. It's not a surprise that he has MMA aspirations in the future because of his athletic ability. Now, he told me flat out, football is his number 1 priority. He's going to go after football as his, next level career professionally. So he is focused on football, and he is putting the work in to be a wide receiver, something he didn't do until, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, right? And so biggest takeaway is how hard those drills are and how great shape all of those people are.
Okay, so I wasn't able to cover it this year. But last year I was wildly impressed with the just SDSU football community, not so much outside of the team, but just the number of former players and the number of current players, or players, who are still on the roster, who came out to support the players doing their pro day stuff on the field. From that perspective, man, what was it like on Friday?
It was great. I mean, there was a lot of current players there, obviously. Some recent, players that are no longer on the team. Like David Delgado was there, Michael Shawcroft. But there was guys from 2 years ago. Daniel Bellinger, an NFL player, came out to support his former teammates, and a former roommate. Jesse Matthews and he, I think, were roommates. And Elijah Cody, who's now a coach, an co-offensive coordinator and quarterback coach. Connor McBride, Jacob Rabb. I know Jacob Rabb transferred to Colorado State, obviously he wants to play at the next level. And, with Ryan Wintermeyer here, he he saw that his playing opportunity might not be there last year, and he wanted to go play somewhere and went to Colorado State. So he's going to do his pro day at Colorado State coming up, but he was still here, wanted to come out and support his former teammates. A lot of friends and family, were there supporting those guys. So I think you called it a family reunion last year, and it felt just like that this year for sure. I wasn't at last year, so it's hard for me to compare, last year to this year, but it definitely felt like a family reunion, seeing all those guys.
I mean, then I think that's the hardest part about these kinds of days. Is there anybody that maybe there was like some buzz about just their performance on Friday?
I think Alama Oluwave probably had the most, I don't want to say impressive performance, because a lot of people, what they did was impressive. I think he showed really good agility in those drills. He had a really good change of direction drill that he did that he seemed to nail pretty good. He's got great athleticism, and I think he showed that off in everything that he did. And he even said afterwards that he thinks that that's something that scouts, definitely appreciated about him, and thought that could be something that could, help him in the evaluation process as he gets towards the draft.
So you said multiple impressive things. Give me a few more.
Jordan Bird, he did some punt return drills. Braxton Burmeister did as well. But Jordan Bird, I think he caught everything. And the Jugs machine did not have its best day, I would say. And Jordan, obviously, with the punt returning, and then he also ran routes and caught passes as a wide receiver, I guess, role. He's a guy, I think, he ran a 4.4, I believe, unofficially. That's what I heard. I didn't see any official time listed for him. Actually, Braxton Burmeister also ran a 4.4. So if you were wondering who ran fastest, from what I heard, and as I said, these times weren't verified or official, but I heard from some, reliable people that they both ran 4.4. And so just think about that. The starting quarterback from last year, ran a 40 as fast as Jordan Bird. So I think those guys helped each other a lot. And then Caden McDonald, one thing I wasn't aware of, but he showed off some long snapping himself. And he's I guess that's something that he's done. He likes to do, has some skill there, and he wanted to show it off as add to his versatility as a defensive player. So that was a surprise. I saw him practicing some long snapping, and I was like, is he out to the side? And I was like, is he actually going to do it? And then he actually got on the field and did it with some scouts watching him and telling him, and timing him. So that was an interesting thing. That's another way to get guys recognized and get guys to make rosters. So
did message Jesse Matthews and asked him what he thought about his day, and he just briefly just said that he accomplished everything he set out to accomplish.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a Burmeister and Bird running routes as receivers, and we know what a technician Matthews is in that regard. How did they look in comparison to somebody who is so elite at it?
You could definitely tell that they're not as good as someone like a Jesse Matthews and even Tyrell Shavers. There were a few, like when they ran a couple, like they did a goal line fade stuff, and I don't believe Braxton or Jordan Bird ran those. I think it was just Jesse and Tyrell. So there were a few different routes that was specifically strictly for those guys. But yeah, Jesse, I was on point. We know how good of a route runner he is, how great of hands he has. Any pass that was thrown his way that was even catchable, he caught. There were some passes that were not catchable, which that he can't control that, obviously. But anything that was in his vicinity, he came down with. So yeah, it was the typical Jesse Matthews route running and hands show that we've seen for the last 4 years. No, that's not going to change anytime soon.
So the last question about that, last year watching Daniel Bellinger do what he did, he just looked like an NFL player. And you would think that if anybody out there would have been like that, it would have been Tyrell Shavers. Did his physicality impress? And do you think he helped himself?
I think so. I was curious to see what his 40 time was. I wasn't able to get that info or anyone to share that with me. From the eye test, it was hard to tell. But obviously he didn't run it as fast as Jordan Bird or Braxton Burmeister. But I was curious, is he in the 4.6, 4, or is he closer to 4.7, 4.8? I think that stuff matters to scouts, even though it's kind of stupid to look at it that way when you've got a 6'6" wide receiver that can go up and get passes. Yeah, he fits the bill for sure. He has great hands too. I mean, I don't think he dropped any passes that were catchable either. So yeah, he looks like an NFL receiver. And one thing Jesse Matthews doesn't have is and Tyrell does, is the height, obviously, and the long arms and things like that. So as we've talked about, none of them got invited to the scouting combine. None of them were in the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl.
East-West,
yeah. I think Jesse and Caden went to the Hula Bowl. Mm-hmm. And I believe there's one other bowl that Braxton Burmeister and Keyshawn Banks went to.
Yeah. Yep.
Which bowl was that?
I don't remember the name.
Yeah. So, just based on not getting invited to the combine, not getting Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, like that'll tell you that what scouts are projecting them to potentially not be, drafted, or at least in the top 5 rounds. But a lot can change. All you need is one team to love what you do, love who you are, and not want to risk waiting to sign you as an undrafted free agent and picking you up in the 6th round. All it takes is one team. You don't need to impress 30 teams to get drafted. You need to impress one team. And I think there was a lot of scouts there. I think there were probably about 15 scouts there. So a lot of those guys saw what we all saw. And, all it takes is to impress one team and you get your shot. Now, just because you don't get drafted, we've talked about this in prior years just because you're not drafted doesn't mean you can't make a team and make a roster and get your opportunity. So these guys, they put in the work, and now, they're going to keep working. Obviously, they're not going to go sit on the couch and not work, but they've done what they can do, and now it's kind of a waiting game until end of April.
Yeah, and I think that what some of these guys are going to be capable of doing. I think Trenton Thompson, I believe I read you said that he was there as well, and obviously
Tariq Thompson.
Oh, so Trenton Thompson wasn't there. Okay, well, Trenton Thompson last year went through these drills, went undrafted, and then obviously came in and played for the Giants as well. So that was good, man. It was good. Thanks for the update.
Yeah, it's a fun event. I'm glad I had a chance to attend it and check it out. I wish that the official times and stuff would be like passed out or provided either after the event or something like that, but maybe I'm asking for too much. But
oh yeah, those things are like closely guarded secrets. I mean, like I think each scout has their own stopwatch and they write down their own numbers, and they don't want them to even that stuff to be shared. I mean, I remember last year Taylor Hawkins was just going to different scouts and trying to ascertain what his numbers were, and they wouldn't even tell the player. So good luck, buddy. Getting that.
Yeah. I'm bringing my own stopwatch next year.
There you go.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us. Hope you guys enjoyed the interview with Coach Bojay and our discussion about today's practice and pro day. As we've talked about, spring game is Thursday night, 6 p.m., Snapdragon Stadium. Tickets are free. Parking is $10, so make sure to come out and support the football team and see how they look. A lot of new faces and a lot of new players, a lot of new coaches. It should be a fun time, so come check it out. Any last words, Paul?
No, man, I think that Coach Lindley said it best. They want to score some touchdowns on Thursday. That's the goal.
Yeah, explosive plays.
Close to plays. That's it.
Thank you all for listening. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment, share on all your favorite platforms, and we'll talk to you next time. You are listening to the SDSU Football Podcast, presented by the East Village Times, with your hosts Andre Hagverdian and Paul Garrison.